All right, I think that's straight in line. How we doing, everybody? Fantastic. All right, let me do this first. All right, so a couple of announcements before we begin. I kind of have to be here when I'm in the screen. All right. So I'm streaming live onto YouTube. It seemed to go well for my previous class, so I guess I'll be doing this from now on. Couple of announcements. So I am unable to teach in person on this Thursday. So I will not be coming to class on Thursday, which means you should not be coming to class, right? This class on Thursday. There will be no lecture, digitally, anything. I'm just pushing everything back. So I pushed your exam back. So if you look online on Canvas, it was previously scheduled for like September 22nd. Now it is September the 29th is when your first exam is due, right? I'm going to open it up probably like September 22nd or September 27th or something like that, and then for about a week you can take the exam. Once you start it, you have to complete it within that time frame. But I'm giving you about a week to complete the exam. But the 29th is by 11:30 p.m. is the last day that you can take the exam, right? Please don't wait till the last minute to take the exam, right? So it closes at 11:30 p.m. on Thursday or on the 29th. I'm not sure. That's a Tuesday, I believe. But it closes at 11:30 p.m. So don't wait until 11 to take the exam because that's when all the problems start to happen, right? Your Wi-Fi goes out, your laptop crashes, right? There's no excuse for missing the exam. You take it online on iCollege. I will publish it soon. And you take the exam online, and then that's how you'll complete that exam. So once again, there's no excuse for missing the exam. If you miss the exam, it's a 0, and each exam is worth a third of your overall grade. So you definitely don't want to miss your exam, right? So once again, make sure that you're keeping track of all due dates. So no class on Thursday, pushing everything back a week. But any other questions about anything? Questions, concerns? All right, excellent. All right, so today we're going over national cinemas. And of course, I want to start off with the way I start off every class, and that's with a list of discussion questions. These are the sort of the takeaways that I want you to think about when you are reviewing the chapters. So first question is always a warm-up question, right, for the class, because it always tends to benefit when we start off with a warm-up question. So this one's easy. Describe a word that you like to use or a word that you hate hearing, right? So what's a word that you like to use often or a word that you don't like hearing, right? So the word that comes up all the time when I do this question is moist. No one likes using the word moist, or no one likes hearing moist. That's uncomfortable for a lot of people, right? Of course, my thing is, it doesn't really bother me that much, but I can understand why the word moist might bother you. Here's the thing. Let's say that you're going over to a friend's house and they bake you a cake, right? It's not a dry cake. How do you explain to them that that's a moist cake? What do you say? What do you say to them? It's not dry. Any suggestions? You just avoid the word moist altogether. No, no one's on board with this. Okay. Up first. Remember your name again?
Kinzer.
Kinzer.
Yes,
Good to have you. What's the word do you like to use, or word do you don't like to use?
A word I like to use. I say it a lot, so I might as well just say it. It's kind of more of a phrase.
Go for it.
No cap.
No cap. Right? Explain to me what this word. Look, I'm hip. I'm cool. I TikTok. I don't TikTok. But explain to me what this means. No cap.
No cap really means no lie.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not lying, so I'm not capping.
You're not capping. Where's the cap come into play?
I don't know where
You have no idea.
from.
There's no cap, right?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. No cap. Up next we have. Remind me your name again.
Eddie.
Eddie. Good to have you.
It's a DC slang thing. It's job.
Jai. Put that in a sense for me. Explain to me what jai means for me.
So say you're asking me a question. You're like, do you want to go to the movies? My response would be job like, yeah, let's go.
Jai like. Excellent. Right? Look, what I'm saying is like I'm down. I totally understand what this. No, I don't understand. but a giant like.
It's basically like saying, I agree, or like, yeah, let's do it.
You said it was slang for what? What word did you say it was?
Jive.
Yeah, but you said it was a, did you say it was a region where the
Oh,
slang's
it's
from?
just DC.
DC,
Yeah.
interesting. Or are you from DC?
Yeah.
I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. There you go. Well, we have a connection. That's what I'm trying to say. Up next.
I guess a word I like using boys. Like,
Boys.
Yeah, you could be like me and the boys going to the movie, me and
Right.
the boys hanging out.
Right, sometimes you gotta go with the boys, right? Boys night out. That's what I say. You gotta go to the boys, you play basketball with the boys. I completely understand what you're saying. Excellent. Up next. Okay, sure, right, so it's sort of like, what's the other word, what would you say again? Totally forgot what it was again, all right, totally forgot. All right, okay, next.
I don't think this is a real word, but whenever something like fits perfectly or someone agrees and we share a mutual agreement, I just say gabagool.
Gabagool.
Yeah.
Interesting, gabagool, like you're saying, I agree.
It's like gabagool, it worked out.
Excellent, right? Sort of similar to the other word that I've already forgotten already. Ja rule. All right, excellent. All right, excellent. Now next.
I don't know, if I agree with stuff, I just kind of go, eh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just short it down.
Okay.
My family
Excellent.
just knows that's my response.
Interesting. Excellent. Any words that we don't like using? Any words that we don't like using? We have one in the back. What do you not like using?
You'll realize this, like.
Okay, you don't like the word.
People say like all the time when talking. You're like, oh, like this, like that, oh, and then like that, like
Right.
that. And you think about it, and since you use it so much, it actually a lot of times lowers like the impact.
Right. It's very hard not to say like when someone brings up that you're saying like all the time. All right, I go next. All right, question number 2. Describe the events that impacted the film industry during this time period. So right now we're talking about the teens, the 19 teens. What's going on in world history that is potentially impacting the film industry? World War I is the obvious one, right? World War I is one of the first major wars in history. And how does that impact film history? Yes?
Well, it's like some countries, like their production completely halted.
Right, exactly. And the obvious one that comes to mind is France, right? So France, before this time, was kind of considered to be sort of like the innovator in film, and they had a lot of prestige and credibility. And they were often expanding into other countries in terms of importing their films. And then World War II happens, and they pretty much just shut down, right? And they never really truly recovered in terms of being sort of this global power in the film industry. And in fact, during World War I, they shut down all production of filmmaking, and they converted, in terms of Pathé, converted to manufacturing ammunition during this time period. How else did the World War I impact the film industry during this time period?
Propaganda.
Right, you're starting to see a little bit of like propaganda films starting to be made during this time period. Certainly. What else? Go for it.
Like America, like they actually their film market boosted because of this.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, and this is the beginning of the United States still has sort of a stranglehold in the in all the world film industry, right? And this is kind of sort of the starting of that. And why is this? Sure, but what else? Why does the United States begin to create sort of their tentacles all over the world during this time period? What led to that, would you say? Maybe we'll get to that. We'll get to that here in a second. But what else? How else did World War I impact the film industry during this time period? And it's sort of the major theme that we're discussing today in this chapter, or how this chapter is sort of constructed. We'll talk about it a little bit, but I'll kind of give you a little bit of a hint, right? So because of the war, previously, before the war, you're starting to see a lot of countries sort of expanding into other parts of the world, right? For example, France was expanding their films. They were exporting their films to countries like Russia. And when World War I happened, the boundaries, so these boundaries just completely closed down, right? And you're starting to see, because of this, because there are embargoes on the film spreading to other countries, individual countries start to develop their own film industries, right? That's where national cinemas comes into play, right? So this is the idea that particular nations are starting to form their own genres of film, right? And you can tell what film that where the film came from based on the artistic expression, the characteristics of the film during this time. So each individual country was sort of separated from each other, and they started to create their own characteristics and film styles. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But what else? So describe some new techniques used in the filmmaking process during this time period. What are some new things that are starting to happen? Yes, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like more lighting, like a lot of distinct lighting and stuff like that.
Right, they're starting to experiment with backlighting, right, exactly, a little more artistic expression, right, in producing these films. Yes?
Better well advancing in their set designs.
Yeah, you're starting to see this, this industrialization of filmmaking, so that you're building large sets, and a lot of times, especially when we're talking about American filmmaking, you would build a set and then you would often reuse the set, right? Great. Let's describe some of the stylistic differences between films in Germany, Italy, Russia. What are some of these, describe some of these characteristics of these individual nations in terms of the way the film are. Okay, we'll get to it. All right, move on to the next question. What is a serial? Right, so this is often considered to be the heyday of the serial film. Can anyone describe to me what a serial is?
Was it like a short film?
Yeah, for the most part, most of the time they were short films. Some of them were a little bit longer than others, but yeah, for the most part, they were short films, right? Typically low budget. They're often thrillers, right? A lot of action, for comparatively. What else? What is the distinct quality of a serial film?
They have like episodes.
Yeah, exactly. So you got episodes back to back. What would be the primary characteristic of a serial?
You got serial.
Say again? Go ahead. Yeah, I mean, sure, definitely. Anything else? They usually ended in cliffhangers, right? So they were short films, right, with cliffhangers at the end, in order to entice you to go back and watch the next one. It was a serial format, and we use that term in film all the time in terms of a serial. Like if you want, can anyone give me an example of contemporary serial? Moving images. I didn't want to give it away. I almost gave it away a second ago.
Let's start with an
I'm not sure. So I'm just talking about in general. Can you give me a contemporary example of a serial format?
Just the format?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
a comic book?
Okay, a comic book. Yeah, certainly that could definitely be an example. A comic book, right? So it could end with a cliffhanger. That way, it entices you to purchase the next comic book. Certainly. But what else? Yes.
like a season finale on a show.
Right. So television, for the most part. A television is a serial format for the most part. It has an overarching story. It shows a segment. Sometimes it ends with a cliffhanger, and then it continues, and then it entices you to watch the next one. That is a serial format. Right? Can anyone give me a film version of a serial? A horror film, definitely. What else?
Ones that are based on a book series.
It could be, yeah. Definitely. The one that comes to mind is the MCU, right? The MCU is essentially a serial. Yeah, it has its confined story, but usually there is some sort of cliffhanger, right, enticing you to watch the other Marvel film. Usually it's the post-credit scene, right? That's kind of that's a serial type story narrative, right? Excellent. Moving on. All right, so before we get into talking about these individual national cinemas, let's actually show an example of, this is a famous French serial, Fantomas. This is about a serial robber slash serial killer, but here's a trailer for that. All right, there you go. I believe it's pronounced Fantomas, but that is a famous French cinema, serial. All right, very good. All right, so let's talk about Germany for a second. So, like I said before, it may be helpful to review this chapter in terms of individual countries and the styles that each individual country had in terms of their filmmaking, right? So let's start off with Germany. The Autorin film, or the author film. So these are films that were became famous by the author of the film, so the screenwriter, or the author of the film. So the person who actually wrote the play or the book was often received credit and notoriety for the film. So Autorin film, what Germany would do was they would take famous plays or books, and they would adapt them into silent films. So Autorin film is not the same as auteurism. Does anyone know what auteurism? We have any film buffs here. Does anyone know what auteurism is? Auteurism. So this is Autorin film. Auteurism is different. Can anyone tell me the distinction? So if Autorin film is the main, the figurehead of the film is the screenwriter, auteurism is the director is the figurehead, is often considered to be the headliner of the artistic expression of the film. So don't get those too confused because they look the same. One of the more noteworthy films during this time period is a film called Student of Prague in 1913. This is notable because it uses a special effect in terms of it takes two different film stocks and it superimposes it on top of each other in order to create the effect of having an actor appear twice in the film, right? So it's the same actor, and you see the actor twice. I'll show a couple of clips, but just kind of set it up. The storyline is you have this student who makes a deal with a demon. The demon sort of tricks the student. He says, I will give you this amount of money if I can have anything in this room. Right? And the student agrees. He says, yeah, that sounds like a great deal. I'll take this money. And then the demon takes the student's reflection in the mirror. Right? So essentially taking a part of his essence. So here's a clip from The Student of Prague in 1913. Here we go. forward to later in the film when we see the actor appear again twice. So right now he's confronting his mirror image. Alright, so lesson learned. If you encounter your mirror image, don't shoot that mirror image because you'll die. Right? That's what we learned from this film. Alright, so whenever we say that a film is innovative, we're saying that it contributes something new to the filmmaking process. And the reason why this film is so notable is because we're starting to see the use of camera tricks and other sorts of imagery tricks in order to convey different messages. Or so we're going beyond this just pointing the camera in front of us and just capturing, sort of like just capturing a play. But we're starting to play with the medium and what we can do with the medium. When I say we, I don't mean we, I mean them, right? But we're starting to play with what filmmaking can be. So that was a student of Prague, 1913. Yes, question?
Could you say the technique again that they used to make two actors?
So they're just superimposed two film stocks on top of each other.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Up next. So it's worth noting that Asta Nielsen, who we talked about last class, she was one of the very first like film stars. Right? Remember we showed her film, The Sexy Dance. Remember how sexy that dance was? Most filmmakers were attempting to replicate her success. So they were trying to find the next Asta Nielsen. But let's go ahead and move on to, we already talked about the heyday of the serial, right? Let's move on to Italy now. So Italy is becoming, or is known for their historical epics and a couple other noteworthy genres, including the diva film. And the counterpart to that is the strongman film, right? So the strongman film, pretty simple. You have this, this masculine strongman, kind of like a Hercules kind of figure, right? But Italy is known for the historical epics. One of the more noteworthy films is Cabiria in 1914. I do want to show an extended scene from that film. Here it is. So you might have noticed that tracking shot in the very beginning, right? And that has been Italian films during this time period were known for that tracking shot, and many films were trying to replicate that. So here's the strongman, right? All right, so often known as the strongman or the peplum film. The peplum film. I do want want to show a contemporary example of a peplum film because we have our own peplum films in the United States. You might have recognized this. Always fun to show contemporary examples. All right. Sometimes we tend to, when we look back on films, we tend to think of them as pretty silly, right? The peplum film of this just guy who's just flexing all the time, and then we forget that that's the kind of films that we still watch today. As a guy just flexing all the time, right? Another thing to bring up is the frock coat films, and I want to make sure that I get this correct. This genre is known for stories of passion and intrigue in upper middle class society, aristocratic societies, is the frock coat films, frock coats. So these are the type of films that are that Italy is well known for during this time period. Moving on to Russia. So Russia, very different in terms of the style. Known for slow pace, melodramatic, tragic endings. Interested in the psychology of the characters, but with not overreacting with acting though. One of the more noteworthy films during this time period is a film called The Dying Swan in 1917. This film is a great example of the tragic ending film during this time period. Just kind of give you a little backstory on the narrative. You have this artist, and he's obsessed with death, and he wants to capture death, right? Whatever that means. So he hires an actress, and then things take a turn. And here is a scene from The Dying Swan, 1917. Yeah, let me show you actually this part of the scene. Here we go. All right, that's The Dying Swan. Once again, it's important to note that these are all silent films. So the YouTube examples that I provide, there are people who have added music to them. So the recording didn't actually capture this music. It's just important to remember that. All right, that was The Dying Swan. In 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution happens, right after World War I, and then the film industry completely takes like a halt, right? Because the control of communication is controlled by the government during this time period. Moving on to France and French filmmaking. Perrier is a notable figure during this time period, making many films. One of them is the Children of Paris in 1913. Another one is the Curse of Greed. I do want to show that a little bit from that film. This is 1917, The Curse of Greed. Just watching this scene right here, what would you say would be innovative or notable? I use the word notable a lot. I'm going to use it a lot. But what would you suggest would be notable about this scene right here?
It's on a natural body of water.
Exactly. We're starting to experiment with filming in actual locations now, right? Because equipment it's becoming slowly more accessible, although cameras are still fragile and heavy. But we're experimenting with actually going outside of the actual studios and theater settings and actually filming, for lack of a better word, Mother Nature, right? Trying to capture Mother Nature's natural beauty. So that was The Curse of Greed. Yes.
You said, Leon's period what?
What was that?
You said Leon's?
Perrier? Yes.
What was?
He's a notable director who directed that film, right? So,
Thank you.
yep, no problem. Up next, let's move on to Denmark. So Denmark, a notable figure, Ole Olsen, founder of Nordisk, a film dominated production. A film worth mentioning is a film called Atlantis in 1913. This is one of the longest films during this time period, and I believe it's still the longest Danish film to date, right? And this was heavily inspired by the Titanic tragedy. This is Atlantis, 1913, a great example of Danish filmmaking. Let's see, there we go. All right, so I'll pause right here for a pop quiz. All right, so you see that blue cube, right? What is that called? Pop quiz. I'll let you think about it. fast forward to here, so we're starting to play with a little bit of color here, to add a little bit of motion to it. So obviously, you could just film it without adding the color to it. But this adds a little emotion. What does the red signify in this particular scene? The heat of the, yeah, exactly, the heat of the engine, right? So you got the blue of the night with that kind of sort of plays with the heat from the red, right? Kind of creating this emotional tension there. Do you have the term for me?
It's called tinting, right?
Tone, yeah, tinting or toning, right? So toning would be the example here, right? So obviously this is a lot more labor inducive in order to, first of all, you're cutting the film to add it together, but then you're also coloring it as well. Right? Good. That was Atlantis. Very long film, about 2 hours long apparently. There we go. Moving on to Sweden. Two films that I do want to talk about. One is Erotiken in 1920. This film is noteworthy because this is one of the very first films that played with, like it's a like a, I wouldn't say romantic, but it's more like a romantic comedy that talks about like these multiple affairs happening and casual relationships. Which is obviously very unusual for this time period. This is 1920, Erotiken by Stiller, a Swedish film, and I do want to show an extended scene from this film. There we go. Pop quiz. What was that? What is this called right here with the words on it? Pop quiz. I'll let
It's a title.
Yes.
I forgot what type of title.
Yes. I'll let you think about it. You got half the word right.
Inner
Inner title. Exactly. Let me ask you this, and this is obviously, there's no right or wrong answer to this, but why do you think the director chose to use a yellow tone in this film? Yes?
Honestly, I think it's kind of supposed to be, I guess, almost show fanciness.
Okay.
Obviously, upper class, the lights would be, because usually they would have bright lights,
Yeah.
maybe chandeliers, and this is to show, kind of how they're living.
I could certainly see that. Yellow is usually associated with gold and prestige, right, and value. Any other opinions? Once again, there's no right or wrong, because I don't have an answer to that. Why do you think this director chose yellow? I mean, red, you wouldn't do red because red would be associated with like heat, right? Unless you really want to do something artistic there. But, well, why yellow?
I think maybe to like get a warm and bright feeling to what the tone they're trying to set.
It does add a little warmth in there, most certainly. I definitely feel that, right? If we want to talk about like the sexual warmth, right? The sexual tension between these characters, certainly. Any other guesses? One thing I notice every time I watch this film is, considering that yes, please.
I just actually looked this up, 'cause I was like curious to see what yellow meant.
Oh, okay.
And it just said that, like, it has conflicting associations. On one hand, it could mean hope, happiness, positivity,
Yeah.
enlightenment, but also could mean cowardice and deceit.
Interesting.
So that might be why I chose it.
Okay, excellent. I did not know that. Yeah, did you have something?
Oh, no.
Just say, okay. Yeah, I like that. That sounds like a great explanation for me. One thing I do notice every time I watch this scene is, as you can see, the gentlemen here are in dark suits, and she's in a lighter suit. And when you use the yellow tone, she almost seems to be radiating. Does anyone notice that? That just seems like, I don't know if that's deliberate or not. That's one thing I've noticed, right? She's sort of radiating, as in like her sexual energy is radiating in the room. Like she's becoming a primary focus, right? This is more like film aesthetics analysis if you want to go in that direction. Good. That's erotica. I believe I pronounced that film correctly. Here's another film, Terragay Vegan, in 1917, another silent film. But this also uses a lot of toning. So here we're seeing the use of red, right, conveying. I mean, we can talk about how it conveys sort of tension, right, and maybe rage and like conflict, right. Another pop quiz. All right, so we talked about intertitles. There's two different types of intertitles. There's dialogue intertitles, which we've seen plenty of examples. Can anyone give me the other type of intertitle? Go for it.
Exposition.
Right, expository, exactly. Right. And expository is when you're just explaining what's happening in the scene to kind of clarify for the audience. Fantastic. I do want to show a contemporary example of a little bit of toning, although maybe we wouldn't call it toning. Let's just do this. So Minority Report is often gets mentioned whenever we talk about color schemes. First, obviously, check out Geico. Just the Geico.
Time frame?
13 minutes.
Investigator from the feds here. Yeah, I already saw a twink from the fed walking around right now. John, words out of your calendar. I left your list in your house. Take away the papers they had it forwarded. See if the neighbors knew where they went. Check all relations.
Second neighbors and relations.
But John, nice. Just get him some coffee. Tell him some stories how to save your ass every day. You can't live without me. I got coffee. Thank you. Danny Whitman, twink from the fed. What's up? Go. Sorry, Danny. I'm gonna have to give you the full course of the
The marks were cleaned a couple of weeks ago. Nobody knows where. Still searching for federally employed.
Time horizon 12 minutes.
What he's doing now, we call scrubbing the image, looking for clues as to where the murder's gonna happen. Visual hunting bug-break pattern, streamline early Georgian details. Rick is being appointed.
And then destination? Undergone, shall not perish from the earth.
Victims are pronounced here, killers here. Beyond that, the day of the crime, only have to run on the images that they produce. So, cop on horseback. Maybe careful. No regular system. Come on. Georgetown. Reconnaissance murder 40 is out. Why don't they call? Uncolored red ball. No crimes and passions, no premeditation, so they show up late. Most first crimes are flash events like this one. Rarely see any premeditation. People got the message.
Oh, this is good. I show a matches like a white Kingsley, 18th century architect in 2 dozen houses in D.C.
Time horizon 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Look at this kid. This one is on the left side without the suit. Yes? So? This one is on the right. It's apart.
Tell me there's only 60 of these American around Sub Mississippi.
Sorry to pause there, but what do you notice about the color scheme being used? This is Steven Silver film. Very dull, right? What's creating that dull feeling? The dark room. What else? Yes.
Hard lighting.
The hard lighting, certainly, right? The blues. You're seeing a lot of blues, right? You're taking away a lot of the reds. Why? Well, I mean, this is deliberate by the director. Why do you think they're using this? Has anyone seen this film, first of all? You have seen the film? Anyone else? It's a science fiction film. To kind of give you an idea of what's happening in the film. In the future, there are precogs that can predict future crimes. So they're preventing crimes from happening because they can see the future, right? But yeah, why this color scheme? What's the point?
Probably honestly to show the kind of a dystopian future.
Okay.
Give that feel.
Okay.
The war field.
There is a little bit of noir in there as well. You can certainly see the inspiration. Of course, we're going to talk about film noir once we get deeper into around the 1930s. Certainly, yes. Okay. Anything else interesting about this? You mentioned the color scheme and the lighting as well, right? Yeah, certainly. Good. So I just wanted to show a contemporary example of how color can sort of impact the scene itself. Okay. All right, I think that's all we're going to go over today. Before we leave, I do want to kind of reiterate what's going to happen the next couple of days. We did end a little bit early, so Thursday no class, right? And then on Tuesday, right, we'll finish up chapter 3, focusing on the United States primarily, and kind of like the industrial Fordian way of creating films. We're going to talk about all that on Tuesday. And then the remaining 2 chapters that we have for the first exam, chapter 4 and 5 in my textbook, is German Expressionism and Soviet Montage. And those 2 are probably the most influential artistic expression still influencing film today, right? So German Expressionism and the use of abstract figures and shapes and the use of lighting, heavily inspired film noir, right? Then Soviet Montage, the use of editing in order to convey a message, right? How you edit something to convey something, that adds something to the scene, right? And that's Soviet Montage. And we're going to talk about both those 2, the next 2 classes after on Tuesday. And then we'll have the exam on September 29th. That's, we'll have no class on the 29th. Because what I wanted to do is I want to make sure that you guys are freed up to take the exam. No excuses for not taking it. Once again, if you don't take the exam, that's a 0, and there's really no way of recovering after that. All right, cool. Any questions about anything? All right, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm just kidding. No. But yeah, I will see you next class. Slowly walk.